The Wishing Well by E.F. Benson. E.F. Benson, 1867 to 1940, is still remembered in Rye, where he was the mayor and also the occupant for many years of Lamb House, whose original tenant was Henry James. They became friends after Benson wrote asking James for a critical opinion of his work. Lamb House must have provided inspiration for ghost stories, as there is a haunting attached to its history, and Benson himself reports seeing a cloaked figure in the garden. The Wishing Well is set in Benson's other spiritual home, Cornwall, where he spent much of his youth and subsequently set many of his tales. This is a splendid story of unrequited love, vengeance, and witchcraft, in which Benson exploits his talents to the full. I am Tony Walker, and this is the Classic Ghost Stories podcast.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret of the dead come back?
The Wishing Well by E.F. Benson. The village of St. Gervais lies at the seaward base of that broad triangular valley which lies scooped out among the uplands of the North Cornish moors, and not even among the fells of Cumberland could you find so remote a cluster of human habitations. 4 miles of by-road, steep and stony, lies between it and the highway, along which in tourist time the motor buses pound dustily to Bude and Newquay, and 8 more separate it from the railhead. Scarcely once in the summer does an inquisitive traveller think it worthwhile to visit a village which his guidebook dismisses with the very briefest reference to the ancient wishing well that lies near the lich gate of the graveyard there. The world, in fact, takes very little heed of St. Gervais, and St. Gervais hardly more of the outer world. Seldom do you see man or woman waiting at the corner where the road from the village joins the highway for the advent of the motor bus, and seldom does it pause there to set down one of its passengers. An occasional trolley laden with sacks of coal and cargo of beer barrels jolts heavily down the lane, for the rest of the farms of the valley and the kitchen gardens of the cottagers supply it with the needs of life, and its few fishing boats bring in their harvest from the sea. Nor does St. Gervais seek after any fruits of science or culture or religion, save such as spring from its soil, which furnishes its wise women with herbs of healing for ailing bodies, and from its tradition of spells and superstition of a darker sort to be used in the service of love or of vengeance. These latter are not publicly spoken of, save in one house at St. Gervais, but are muttered and whispered in quiet conversations, and thus the knowledge has been handed down from mother to daughter since the days when, 3 centuries ago, a screeching, handcuffed band of women were driven from here to Bodmin, and, after a parody of a trial, burned at the stake. It was strange that the vicarage, which might have been expected to be unblackened by the smoke of legendary learning, was the one house where magic and witchcraft were openly and sedulously studied. But such study was purely academical, the Reverend Lionel Eustace being the foremost authority in England as a writer on folklore. His parochial duties were light and his leisure plentiful, for a couple of services on Sunday were, to judge by the congregation, sufficient for the spiritual needs of his parish, and for the rest of the week he was busy in the library of the creeper-covered vicarage that stood hard by the lich gate that led to the churchyard. Here, patient but unremitting, he worked at his great book on witchcraft, which had engaged him so many years, occasionally printing some subsection of it as a pamphlet. The Origin of the Witch's Broomstick, for instance, had furnished curious reading. He was a wealthy man with no expensive taste, save that for books on his subject, and the big library he had built onto the vicarage had now but few empty shelves. 20 years ago, when ill health had driven him from the chill clays of Cambridge, he had been appointed to this remote college living, and the warm, soft climate and the strange, primitive traditions that hung about the place suited both his health and his hobby. Mr. Eustace had long been a widower, and his daughter Judith, now a woman of 40 years old, kept house for him. The time of her more marriageable maidenhood had been spent here in complete isolation from her own class, and though sometimes, when she saw the courtships and childbirths of the village, the sense of what she had missed made a bitter brew for her, she had long known that St. Gervase had cast some spell upon her, and that had a wooer from without sought her, he must indeed be a magnet to her heart, if he could draw her from this secluded valley into the world that lay beyond the moors. In the few visits she had paid to relations of her father and mother, she had always pined to be home again, and to wake to the glinting of the sun on the gorse-clad hills, or to the bellowing roar of some westerly gale that threw the sheets of rain against the window. A stormy day at home was worth all the alien sunshine, and the sandy beach of the bay, with the waves asleep or toppling in foam-laced and thunderous, was better than the brilliance of southern seas. Here alone her mind knew that background of content which is brighter than all the pleasures the world offers. Here every day the spell of St. Gervase was like some magic shuttle weaving its threads through her. Since her mother's death, Judith's days had been of a uniform monotony. Household cares claimed a short hour of the morning, and then she went to the library where her father worked to transcribe his works, if he had a section of his work ready for dictation, or to look up endless references in the volumes that lined the room, if he was preparing the notes which formed the material of his dictation. Some branch of witchcraft was always the subject of it, some magical rite for the fertility of the cattle, some charm for childbearing, some philtre for love, or, what had by degrees got to interest her most, one that caused the man on whom a girl's heart was set, but who had naught for her, to wither in the grip of some nameless sickness, and miserably to perish. Month by month, as her father pushed his patient way forward through the ancient mists, these satanic spells that blighted grew to be a fascination with Judith. Just now he was deep in an exploration into wishing wells, and there she sat this morning, pencil in hand for his dictation, as he walked up and down the library, glancing now and then at his memoranda spread out on the table. "These wishing wells," he said, "are common to the whole of early European beliefs, but nowhere do we find that the power which supposedly presided over them was at the beck and call of any chance persons who invoked their efficacy. Only witches and those who had occult powers could set the spell working, and the origin of that spell was undoubtedly satanic, and not till Christian times were these wells used for any purpose but that of invoking evil. The form of these wells is curiously similar. An arch or shelter of stonework is invariably built over them, and in the sides are cut small niches where, in Christian days, candles were placed or thank offerings deposited. What they were previously used for is uncertain, but they were, beyond doubt, connected with the evil spells, and I conjecture that the name of the person devoted to destruction was scratched on a coin or written on a slip of linen or paper to await the action of the diabolical power. The most perfectly preserved of these wishing wells known to me is that of St. Gervase in Cornwall. Its arched shelter is in excellent condition, and the well, as is usual, very deep. The local belief in its efficacy has survived to this day, though its power is never invoked, as far as I can ascertain, for evil purposes. A woman in pregnancy, for instance, will drink of the well and pray beside it. A girl whose lover has gone to sea will scratch her name on a silver coin and drop it into the water, thus ensuring his safe return. The village folk are curiously reticent about such practices, but I can personally vouch for cases of this kind. He paused, fingering the short Van Dyke beard that grew greyly from his chin. "My dear, I wonder if that is quite discreet," he said to Judith. "But, after all, it is highly improbable that any copy of my work published by the University at a guinea will find its way here. But I think I will chance it. Dear me, the bell for luncheon already. We will resume our work this evening, if you are at leisure, as I have much ready for dictation." Judith smiled to herself as she paged the sheets. She knew very much more about her father's parishioners than he, for he, scholar, recluse, and parson, only lived on the fringe of their lives, whereas she, in chatty visits to the women who sat and knitted at their cottage doors, had got into real touch with an inner life to which he was a stranger. She knew, for instance, that old Sally Trenair, whose death less than a week ago had been a source of such relief to her neighbours, was universally held to be a witch, and Sally was always muttering and mumbling round the wishing well. None who crossed her will prospered. Their cows went dry or threw stillborn calves. Their sheep wilted. The atrocious henbane, fatal to cattle, appeared in their fields. So the prudent wished Sally a polite good day, and sent her honey from their hives and a cut of prime bacon when the pig was killed. But from some vein of secretiveness, Judith did not tell her father of such talk, whispered to her over the knitting needles, which would have inclined him to modify his view about the surviving association of the wishing well with evil invocations. It was idle gossip, perhaps, for if you had challenged her to say whether she believed such tales of old Sally, she would certainly have denied it. And yet something deep down in her would have whispered, "I don't only believe, I know." Today, when luncheon was finished, her father returned to his desk and Judith started to walk a couple of miles up the valley to the farm of John Penath, whose family from time immemorial had owned these rich acres. For the last 8 years, he and his wife had lived there alone, for their only son Stephen had gone out to America at the age of 16 to seek his fortune. But fortune had not sought him, and now, when his father was growing old and his health declining, Stephen was coming home with the intention of settling down here. Judith remembered him well, a big, handsome boy, with the blue of the sea in his eyes and the sunshine in his hair, and she wondered into what sort of man he would have grown. She had heard that he was already home, but though she was curious to see him, the motive for her visit was really the same as that which so often drew her to the Penath farm, namely, to have a talk with Stephen's mother. There was no one, thought Judith, who was so learned in what was truly worth knowing as Mrs. Penath. She couldn't have pointed you India on the big globe that stood in her parlour, or have answered the simplest board school question about Queen Elizabeth, or have added 5 to 4 without counting on her fingers. But she had rarer knowledge in the stead of such trivialities. She had the healing touch for man and beast. She stroked an ailing cow, and next day it would be at pasture again. She whispered in the ear of a feverish child, plucking gently at its forehead, and pulled a headache out so that the child slept. And she, alone of all the village, paid no court to Sally Trenair, nor sought to propitiate her. One day, as she passed Sally's cottage, Sally had screamed curses on her and followed her, yelling halfway to the farm. Then suddenly Mrs. Penath had turned and shot out her finger at her. "Grach nos os ta. Havel a war pub onan. You silly tipsy old crone," she had cried. "Down on your knees and crave my pardon, and then get home and don't cross my way again." Sure enough, Sally knelt on the stones and slunk off home, and thereafter, if Mrs. Penath was down in the village, she would make haste to get into her cottage and shut the door. Mrs. Penath, it seemed, knew more than Sally. Judith swung her easy way up the steep hill, hatless in spite of the hot sun, and unbreathed by the ascent. She was a tall woman, black-haired and comely, her skin clear and healthy, with the bloom on it that only sun and air can give. Her full-lipped mouth hinted that passion smouldered there. Her eyebrows, fine and level, nearly met across the base of her forehead. Her eyes, big and black, looked ever so slightly inwards. So small was the convergence that it was no disfigurement. When she looked directly at you, it wasn't perceptible, but if she was immersed in her own thoughts, then it was there. Most noticeable was it when her father was dictating to her some grim story of malign magic or witchcraft. But now she had come to the paved road through the garden of the farmhouse, set with flowers and herbs in front of the espaliered apple trees, and there was Mrs. Penath knitting in the shade of the house during these hot hours before she went out again to chicken run and milking shed. But you're a welcome sight, Miss Judith," she said in the soft Cornish speech, "and you heartless in the sun as ever. But indeed, you're one of the wise who've made the sun and rain your friends, and 'tis far you'd have to search ere you've found better. Come in, dear soul, and have a glass of currant water after your walk, and tell me the goings-on down at St. Gervais." Judith always fell into their mode of speech when she was with the native folk. "Sure, there's little to tell," she said. "There was a grand catch 2 days agone, and yesterday was the burying of old Sally Trenair." Mrs. Penath pulled out for her a glass of the clear ruby liquor for which she was famous. "Strange how the folk was scared of that tipsy old poppet," she said. "She had nobbut a few rhymes to gabble and a foul tongue to flap at them. A tale of curses she blew off at me one day, and I doubt not she hid my name in the wishing well, though I never troubled to look." "Hid your name in the wishing well?" asked Judith, thinking of the morning's dictation. Mrs. Penath shot a swift, oblique glance at her. There were certain things she had noticed about Judith, and they interested her. "Oh, my dear, you've sure got too much sense and book learning to heed such tales," she said. "But when I was a girl, my mother used to talk of them. Even now I scarce know what to make of such strange things." "Oh, tell me of them," said Judith. "My father's just set on the wishing wells and the lore of them. He was dictating to me of them all the morning." "Hey, to think of that. Well, when I was a girl, there were many queer doings round the well. A maid would tell an old crone like Sally if she fancied a young man and get some gabble to con over as she sipped the water. Or if a fellow had an ill will towards another, he'd consult a witch woman, and she'd write the name of his enemy for him and bid him hide it in the well. And then, sure as eve or morning, tribulations drove fast on him, and as long as his name bided there, his cows would go dry, or his boat be wrecked, or his children get deadly dwams, or his wife break her marriage vows, or he himself would pine and fail till he was scarce able to put foot to floor, and presently the bell would be tolling for him. Idle tales, no doubt. Judith had been drinking this in, eager as the thirsty earth drinks the rain after drought, or as a starving man sets his teeth in food. Her mouth smiled. Her blood beat high and strong. It was as if she was learning some news of good fortune which was hers by birthright. Just then there came a step in the passage, and the door opened. "Why, 'tis Stephen," said Mrs. Penath. "Come, lad, and pay your duty to Miss Judith. Maybe she remembers you." Tall as she was, he towered over her. He had a boy's face still, and the sea was in his eyes and the sun in his hair. And on the instant Judith knew that no magnet of man would avail to draw her from St. Gervais. There was dictation again for her up till summer-time, and when, after that, her father went back to his books, she strolled out, as she often did on hot nights like this, before going to bed. Never yet had she felt so strong an emotional excitement as that afternoon when Mrs. Penath, talking of those old beliefs of her girlhood, had somehow revealed Judith to herself. All that narrative about the wishing well was already familiar to some secret cell in her brain. She only needed to be reminded of it to make it her own. And on top of that had come Stephen's entry, and her heart had leaped to him. Some mixed brew of these two was at ferment within her now. Sometimes a bubble from one, sometimes from the other, rose luminous to the surface. She felt restless and tingling with stored energy, and she paused for a moment at the gate of the garden, uncertain how to spend it. The night was thickly overcast, the road that led down to the village a riband of grey, scarcely visible, and as she stood there, she heard a step, brisk and active, coming along it, and there, swung into view, recognisable even in the deep dusk by his height and gait, the figure of Stephen on his way to the village. Dearly would she have loved to call to him and walk with him, but that could not be. Besides, another desire tugged at her, and when he was past, she turned in at the lich gate to the churchyard. The white tombstones glimmered faintly in the dusk, and she looked up beyond them towards the grave by which she had stood 2 days ago at the burying of old Sally. Then her breath caught in her throat, for she could see the mound of new-turned earth gleaming whitely. She made her way to it. This dark earth was certainly luminous with some wavering light, and on the moment she was conscious that Sally herself not the mere bag of bones that had been put away in the earth, was close to her. So vivid was this impression that she whispered, "Sally? Are you there, Sally?" No audible response came, but the answer tingled in every nerve in her body, and she knew that Sally was here. No pale, wandering spirit, but a power friendly and sisterly, and altogether evil. It was trickling into her, growing warm in her veins as by some transfusion of blood. She went to the wishing well, and kneeling on the curbstone of it, drank of its water from her cupped hands. Something stirred beside her, and turning, she saw at her side, illuminated by some pale gleam, a little bent figure, shrouded in clean grave clothes, and a brown, wizened face, which she had last beheld in the composure and dignity of death, now all alive with glee and with welcome. And her flesh was weak, for in a spasm of terror she sprang to her feet with arms flung out against the spectre, and lo! there was nothing there but the quiet churchyard with the headstones of those who slumbered there, and at her feet the black, invisible water of which she had drunk. Despising herself for the fright, and yet winged with it, she ran stumbling from the place, not halting till she was back at the vicarage, where the light shining from the library window showed that her father was still pursuing his academic researches into the world of things occult and terrible, of which the doors were now swinging open to admit her in very truth. For some days the horror of that moment by the well was effective, and she threw herself into the normal ways of life, which lured her with a new brightness. She often saw Stephen, for it was he who brought the milk of a morning from the farm, and she would be out in the garden by the time of his early arrival, cutting roses for her vases, or more strenuously engaged in weeding the borders. At first she gave him just a nodded "Good morning," but soon they would stand chatting there for 5 minutes. She knew she made a fine, handsome figure. She saw he appreciated her healthy splendour. He looked at her with the involuntary tribute a man pays to a good-looking woman. Fond, wild notions took root in her mind, spreading their fibres beneath in the soil and anchoring there. Another morning she heard him singing as he clattered down the road in the milk cart, a big, rough, resonant voice, of high pitch for a man. Judith played the organ in church, conducting a choir practice every Saturday for the singers, and next week Stephen was sitting among the men while she took them through the canticles and hymns. Women and girls took alto and treble parts. The chief chorister was Nance Pascoe, a maid of 20, and she was like a folded rosebud just bursting into full flower. By some blind instinct, Judith began to dislike her. She would stop in the middle of a verse to tell the trebles they were flat, which meant that Nance was the culprit. Again, she would ask the tenors singly to sing some line over which they had bungled, and had a word of praise for Stephen. Or she would go to the farm for a chat with Mrs. Penath, and by some casual questions learn that Stephen was hedge-clipping nearby in the meadow. Then she would remember she wanted a chicken for next day, and go to tell him. It was but a step. In 100 infinitesimal ways she betrayed herself. Mixed with this growth of longing which had so firmly rooted itself was another of more poisonous breed. There was a power eager to help her, and like a frightened fool she had fled from its manifestation. But she knew now she was making no way with Stephen, and now she bethought herself again of it, and found that her terror had withered, and that her thirst for commerce with these dark enchantments was keen, not only for the help they could give her, but for her own love of them. Once more in the evening, when her father was back at his books, she set out for the wishing well. Her step was noiseless on the grass of the churchyard, and she was close to the wishing well, still screened by bushes that grew there, when she heard from behind them a ringing man's laugh, and a girl's voice joined in. "Sure she's terrible set on you, Stephen.
It makes me bubble within when she says at the choir singing, 'Yes, very nice, Mr. Penath.' And what the poor soul means is, 'Ah, Stephen, do 'ee come here and give me a hug?'" Stephen laughed again. "I'm fair scared of her," he said, though mother laughs fit to burst when she's come up to the farm to see and order one egg or a sprig of mint. And every morning when I take the milk, the old girl be weeding and hoeing, showing off like, as if she was a strong man at the fair. "I declare I'm sorry for her," says Nance, "for I know what it is to love you, poor empty heart." "Nance, we must put our banns up," said he. "I'm scared, but give your lad a kiss to strengthen him, and I'll pluck up and ask Parson to read us out next Sunday." There was silence. "Hey, Stephen, don't hug so tight," whispered Nance. "You'll get your fill of me ere long, just a drink from the well for us both, and then I must go home." Judith stole back along the grass, and from behind the curtain in the parlour window saw the two, arm entwined, pass down the road. No thought was there now in her mind of any love philtre. No longer did she want the help of a friendly power to get Stephen. He had mocked at her. He was scared of her, and soon he would have good reason for that. Of Nance she hardly thought. It was not for Nance that her heart was black as the water in the wishing well. She felt no hysterical rage or longing for revenge. It was a hellish glee that fed her soul. Quaint and pleasant was it, she thought, as she wrote on a slip of paper the name Stephen Penath, that it should have been his mother who taught her that. Mrs. Penath had laughed fit to burst at her, so Mrs. Penath must learn not to laugh so much. She went forth with the inscribed slip. The power she courted was flooding into her, wave on wave. Now she was back at the well again, and there she knelt a moment, drinking in, like a thirsty field, the dew of power with which the air was thick. She felt in the darkness for one of those fern-fringed niches in the wall, and deep among its fronds she hid the paper. "Master of evil and of me," she muttered, "send sickness and death on him whom I here dedicate." Something stirred beside her. She knew that the presence which had terrified her before was manifest again. She turned with hands of welcome, and there beside her was the shroud-wrapped figure and the wizened face. But now the shroud was white no longer, but spotted with earth mould, and the flesh was rotting from the face. Judith put her arms close round the spectre and kissed the frayed lips fretted with decay, and she felt it melting into her. She shut her eyes in the ecstasy of that union. When she opened them, she was clasping the empty air. She was down early next morning, full of youthful fire and fitness, and presently the milk cart clattered up to the gate. But it was not Stephen who drove it, but Mrs. Penath. "'Tis I who've come with your milk today, Miss Judith," she said, "for Stephen's got a terrible bad headache, and I bade him lie abed, but he charged me to ask Parson to put up his banns come Sunday." "Oh, is Stephen to be married?" asked Judith. "Who's the maid?" "Just Nance Pascoe, whom he's played with since he was a lad." "Then he's lucky," said Judith, "for she's pretty as a picture. I'll tell my father about the banns, and I'm so sorry Mr. Stephen's not well, but he'll mend quick." The days passed on, and soon it was seen that Stephen lay stricken with some sore fever, to which neither his mother's healing hands nor the doctor's potions brought relief. Every morning Judith learned from Mrs. Penath that he was no better, and every morning she felt herself the object of some keen, silent scrutiny. She was not one who prinked before her glass, but one day, after Mrs. Penath had gone, she ran upstairs and questioned her face. It certainly had changed. It was sharper in outline, and that cast in her eye was surely more pronounced. But she liked that. It seemed an outward and visible sign of her power. Every night now she sat by the wishing well, concentrating on her desire. The news of Stephen had been joyfully bad that day. His fever had burned more fiercely, consuming the flesh on his bones and drinking up his strength. Twice now had his banns been called, but it was not likely that he would go to church next as a bridegroom.
The moon was soon to rise as Judith got up to go home. She fancied she heard something stir in the bushes by the well and called, "Sally! Sally!" But no response came. Her limbs were light with joy. She danced along the strip of turf, leaping high in the air for the very exuberance of her soul. And soon, as she turned out of the lich gate, Mrs. Penath stole out of the bushes. She had a dark lantern with her, and she searched the walls of the wishing well. She spied the paper Judith had hidden there, and she drew it out and read it. She tore it in half, and on the blank piece she wrote another name and put it back exactly where it had been. That night Stephen slept well and long, and in the morning, even as Judith had surmised, he was mending quick. Judith was not in the garden at the milk hour to hear the favourable report, and later in the day Dr. Addis was called in. He found her suffering from just such an attack of fever as he had been attending for the past fortnight. It puzzled him, but his treatment of the other patient was proving successful, and he assured her father there was no cause for alarm. Fevers ran their course, and Judith's fever ran its course even more fiercely. She was lying in her bed facing the window 10 days after she had been taken ill. She knew that the power she had absorbed into her when she embraced that spectral horror by the wishing well was being drained out of her by some vaster potency, which, vampire-like, was drinking up her own vitality as well. She had been conscious all day, but often she had seen, waveringly like the flame of a candle blown this way and that in a draught, the dim semblance of that shrouded figure round which she had cast her welcoming arms. It seemed to be still attached to her by some band of filmy whiteness, and to be incomplete. But about the hour of sunset, she saw that the spectre stood by her bed, fully formed and severed from her. The face was now deeply pitted by corruption, and it floated away from her and drifted out of the window. She was left here, human once more, but sick, and to death. She remembered how she had written Stephen's name and dedicated him to the power of the wishing well. Yet what had come of that? For the last week now Stephen had brought the morning's milk, hale and handsome, with inquiries about her from his mother. Could it be, she questioned herself, that she had failed in some point of that damnable ritual, and that what she had written was active not for his doom, but for hers? It would be wise to destroy that slip of paper, if she could only get to it. Not because she had ceased to wish him evil, but from the fear that it was her vitality that was being drained from her on that fruitless purpose. She got out of bed, giddy with weakness, and managed to get into a skirt and jersey and slip her feet into her shoes. The house was quiet, and step by step she struggled downstairs and to the door. The wholesome wind off the sea put a little life into her, and she shuffled along the strip of turf down which she had danced and capered, and which lay between the lich gate and the well. She passed round the screen of bushes, and there, on the stone bench, was Stephen's mother. She rose as Judith appeared, and curtsied. "Oh dear, why you look poorly indeed, Miss Judith," she said. "Is it wise for you to come out to the wishing well too? There have been strange doings there." "I'll be mending soon," said Judith. "A drink from the wishing well was what I fancied." She knelt down on the curb, leaning one hand against the wall of the well, while with the other she felt among the ferns that fringed it. There was the slip of paper she had hidden, and she drew it forth. "Take your drink then, Miss Judith," said Mrs. Penath. "Why, whatever have you found? That's a queer thing to have gotten. A slip of paper in it. Open it, dear soul. Maybe there's some good news in it." Judith crushed it up in her hand. There was no need for her to look, and even as she knelt there, she felt a sweet lightening and cooling of her fever come over her. Mrs. Penath shot out her hand at her. "Open it, you slut, you paltry witch," she screamed. "Do my bidding." Judith opened it and read her own name written there. She tried to rise to her feet. She swayed and staggered, and she fell forward into the wishing well. It was very deep, and the sides of it were slippery with slime and water moss. Once she caught at the step on which she had knelt, but her fingers failed to grasp it, and she sank. Once after that she rose, and then there came a roaring in her ears, and to her eyes a blackness, and down her throat there poured the cool water of the wishing well.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
So this is this little interlude while you're looking at the fire and imagining yourself drinking a nice cup of tea or coffee in that lovely Victorian library, where I try and sell you the benefits of becoming a patron. My friend Ryan, who is an expert on marketing, or so he tells me, he says I need to sell you the benefits. What's in it for me is obvious. I get recompense for my time and my work, and I need to say that a lot of people tell me that they actually support me as a patron to say thank you for my work. So it's actually not what they get out of it. What they get out of it is helping me, and that is massively fantastic, really, from them. And they have all my love for that. But other people who are kind of doing a bit more mathematical constructions might find there's 300 plus, going on 400 stories, some novel-length stories, and you get a link to my Google Drive, and you can download all these stories and do what you want with them, listen to them whenever you want, and there's no ads on any of them. So that is my selling point to you. No ads, a huge library of stories, $5 a month for just ghost stories. And that's all I've got to say, really. So just enjoy a second or two more with the Victorian Library. I just got very sidetracked then in looking into how witches are portrayed and have been portrayed over the centuries in Western stories, that is to say, both mythological stories in Greek and Norse religion, and then, looking at Gothic fiction, looking at Macbeth, Goethe, and Dancing Around. Now, I realise I'm not going to have time to talk about any of those, so I've done a separate piece on that, which I've posted on the Patreon. I think it's public, so you don't have to be a patron to read it. Anyway, let's get back to the story. So, E.F. Benson, probably, certainly among my favourite authors of the period and of this kind of story. Probably him and Edith Wharton are my favourites, I think. And then M.R. James, of course, and then we could do a big long list. I think I'll probably put Lovecraft in there somewhere, in the top 10 somewhere. I enjoyed the Lovecraft story I recently did. See how my mind's dancing again, never mind. E.F. Benson. Edward Frederick Benson. Now, we've done, I think it was called Fred to his mates. I don't think he called them mates, though. And his oppos. And so we've done stories by him again, so you may have heard all of this stuff. So he was born in 1867, 24th July, at Wellington College in Berkshire, where his father was headmaster, I think, and he died in 1940, which must have been really bad for him, because although he died at the beginning of 1940, so he hadn't seen the fall of France, and he hadn't seen the terrible retreat from Dunkirk inflicted upon the British Army. Heroic, though, in all those small boats, went and saved the people, saved the soldiers, but things were looking fairly bleak, I think. Bad time to die. He died of throat cancer. Is there a good time to die? Don't know. So anyway, so let's talk about his life, though. So he was the fifth child of Edward White Benson, a notable figure in the Church of England. He was also founder of the Ghost Club, his dad. I've said this before. He was Bishop of Truro, hence the Bensons being connected with Cornwall, growing up there. And he later became Archbishop of Canterbury, like the top dude in the Anglican Church. So he had his brothers Arthur Christopher, Robert Hugh, AC, and I've done an AC story. I haven't done a Robert Hugh. Robert R.H. Benson, I find his stories, because he became a Catholic priest, I think, and I think his stories are a little bit sermonizing. Sometimes they're kind of trying to make doctrinal points. And I think you always lose that. I think if you write a story and you're trying to get across a particular viewpoint that you have, whether it be on, evolution or the future of cryptocurrency or whatever it is, or religion or politics, if you're trying to make your point and you're sermonizing to people, it's usually you lose the point of a story. I'm sure there are exceptions to that. Possibly 1984 by Orwell succeeds in doing that, but maybe even Gulliver's Travels. But yeah, okay. Otherwise, let's not get down those rabbit holes. So anyway, his sister Margaret. Now, I think his sister Margaret was an Egyptologist, but all of them were very successful. So Fred's education began at Temple Grove School, followed by Marlborough College. Very nice place, Marlborough. I've never been to the school there, but I mean, I've been outside the school, and I like it as a place. Marlborough Downs, very nice part of the world. And he wrote his early bits and bobs that later became his novel David Blaze, and then he went on to King's College, Cambridge, where he became an active member of the Pitt Club. I don't know what the Pitt Club is. I'm guessing it's to do with politics, the younger Pitt and all that kind of thing. Benson's literary career took off with the publication of Sketches from Marlborough, and his first novel Dodo was released in 1893. Let's work out his age. He wasn't very old. He was in his 20s, 26, and he sequelized. Oh, that's a horrible word. He created sequels to Dodo, Dodo the Second, and Dodo Wonders, which reflect the social milieu pre-World War Britain. Of course, he came from the kind of elite circles, and so he was uniquely. And if you notice in his stories, this one's different, but many of his stories, his humorous stories, Map and Lucia and things like that, satirize this country house weekend world where they all just go from cold and dusty country house to country house and don't actually have a job. But I think there was a lot more to him than that. He made fun of it, and he was most famous for Queen Lucia, Miss Mapp, and all of that social rivalries in the fictional town of Tilling, drawn from his experience in Rye, East Sussex. And we noted at the very introduction that he was mayor of Rye, lived in Lamb House, which had belonged to Henry James. Interesting house. Do you know, when I was down there last year, we were down in West Sussex. We didn't get as far over as Rye. It's such a long way, and it's difficult to get to from here. So Sheila's, funnily enough, going down to Lewis again this year, but I'm not. I'm looking after the dogs. She's going to a sound therapy thing. She's very into that, with her friend Siobhan, who's from Brighton, who is living in Costa Rica. So I think she's come back from Costa Rica. Anyway, they're doing this gathering of the ladies. This is actually relevant to something I'm going to mention. I think it's a woman's only thing. Anyway, and they'll be sisters together, and they'll invoke the earth energies, and this is like related to a theme of this story, really, in a funny way. I can usually relate most things to most things because my mind sparks off like a spider's web, an electric spider's web. So anyway, so this is him. Of course, E.F. Benson is most famous to us as a writer of macabre tales, and some of his, and don't criticise my use of an R there in macabre, please. I'm sensitive about it. Macabre, I'll say, because I want to. And I say iron as well, because I want to. And anyway, call it an affectation if you want. I don't care. Where were we? So he's the bus conductor is one of his most famous ghost stories. I think his ghost stories are of a mixed bunch. Some are like The Lights, which is about Pictish people. I wasn't particularly impressed. How Fear Departed the Long Gallery is really funny, and it's a satire of these poor aristocrats, falling on hard times. It's a bit like Cold Comfort Farm in some ways. Another great book. We won't go into that. Stella Gibbons. We won't go into that. And but I mean, I Caterpillars I found quite disturbing, and there's a police thing in the background here. I actually don't believe they have that many emergencies. Honestly, don't. I think they just put it on when they want the tea, and they blue light themselves home, have a nice cup of tea with the missus, turn around, come back and arrest somebody for something. Anyway, this isn't to be a slur on the police, just an idle observation. And also, you may have heard during this story, the scrap man's been very busy this morning, dumping loads of iron, and I was trying to wait for him to finish, and I did wait in some periods, but I got bored with it, and I think, I've got to finish this. Anyway, so you may know, whether it's relevant or not, that he was discreetly homosexual at a time when it meant you'd go to jail, or even have something horrible done to you, like Alan Turing in the 1950s, chemically castrated, grim. So anyway, there we are, that's EF. Let's talk about this story, The Wishing Well, published in 1923. It was published in the collection Visible and Invisible by Hutchinson Co. in 1923. And it's got a wide range of tales, and this isn't... I think I did Negotiam Perambulans, another of his stories set in Cornwall. So he has a number of stories set in Cornwall, which I like. Okay, liberty I took with it. I put a bit of Cornish in it. I don't know if you know, but I'm actually learning Cornish at the moment. And why not? Again, why not? I really like it. And so I had her speak, because they're in West Cornwall, so I thought, at that time, it's not inconceivable at this historic period that some of the old ladies would speak Cornish, and why not? And it's a fine, fine language. I worried about I said something like, Grach nos osta, so you are a night witch. Havel a war pobonen, like knows everyone, like everyone knows. Now, I had some problems thinking later on when I didn't. I thought, should I put Kepar a war pobanan? And I'm influenced by Welsh, because in Welsh that would be Gwrach nos wyt fel y gwir. You could say pobon, pobin, or pawb. So, yeah, anyway, I put it in. Why not? I'm allowed to put bits in, I think, because it's my telling, so I can do it. And I do tend to try and characterise, and that's just the style I do, and I think a lot of people like it, so some people don't like it. Don't have to listen. So anyway, let's talk about the craft of the story. So it's third person limited. That is to say, we're outside Judith, aren't we? We're not first person. We're not Judith, I saw this and I did that. And I think that's important, because the problem with first person is you have to reveal everything to the reader, except if I think what's his name? Is it Gone Girl? The girl on the train, one of those anyway, where she's that out of her head on drink, she actually doesn't know what's going on. Or Memento, I don't know if you remember that film, where he doesn't know what's going on, so it's not in third person, because it's very hard to do a film in first person. It's very hard to make a film in first person, that you shoot it from behind their eyes. I saw one called The King of Cups about tarot that was like that. That was interesting. I liked that film. Anyway, so it's third person but limited. That is to say, we have limited access to the thoughts and feelings of anybody else. We have access to Judith's thoughts and feelings. That's why it's not first person, but it's not omniscient. That is, we don't know everybody's. And older writers would hop around people's heads all the time. This is considered a cardinal sin in creative writing these days. If you're in somebody's head, you've got to stay in their head. You can switch first person viewpoints in serial, but you can't jump in one scene, which you'll find a lot of the old authors do. But that's very, very bad considered. It's just a fashion, I'm being very iconoclastic, because the rules that are doled out by creative writing teachers are just fashion. That's all, and it will change. Okay. Actually, he begins the story in quite a cinematic fashion. He's almost like we're zooming in. We're seeing the Cornish moorland. We're seeing the coast. We're seeing, and then when the focus shifts to this village, San Gervais. It's remote. It's up on the moors. There's little tiny roads going there. Hardly anything comes and goes. We see occasional bus. We see hardly anybody waiting for it, and then he gets more into, we're not just, this is what you can't do with a camera. You'd need a narrative voice as well to be talking to you, but very distantly, very omnisciently, almost in some ways, telling the narrator's voice telling us that, actually St. Gervais is quite happy being cut off, and that's a big bit of foreshadowing, isn't it? This plays into the later tropes that would become folk horror. Now, folk horror has already happened by this time. It wasn't called that, but things like J. Sheridan Le Fanu's Laura Silverbell, Arthur Machen, all of these, they're very folk horror. And there's this idea of these remote settlements that keep themselves to themselves, but they harbour ancient knowledge that has descended down. This is a big deal at the time. I'm going to, in the piece I did about witches, I talk about Wicca and particularly Gardnerian, Gerald Gardner's version of witchcraft, which he claimed he was initiated by an actually authentic coven in the New Forest. Now that may be bollocks. I think Ronald Hutton thinks it's bollocks, but I mean, he was far too elegant to say it in those terms. Maybe he would actually say it in those terms. If you ever listen, I don't know him, but I've seen a number of his talks and videos, so he might. It depends. I don't know. And anyway, so yeah, folk horror, remote, ancient beliefs, the wishing well, and then we kind of zoom in, and the first port of call is the vicar. It's the vicarage and the vicar, and we see this fantastic. He would know all about rural clergymen, and they had a pretty easy life, many of them, and a lot of them were gentlemen. I've talked about what gentlemen are before. They don't have to work for a living, but they'll get a stipend, and they get a nice house, vicarage, and they'd work on a Sunday, and usually they would go round the village, and if they were good, they would be with the dead and the dying and the births, and actually being like a therapist and a social worker and a moral guide to the flock, and that was their role. But of course, he is too intellectually abstracted in his work on witchcraft. And then we get Judith, and we get this description of she's tall, she's quite a powerful figure, she is attractive, and she knows she is, but there's a slight cast to her eye, and that is the first bit of foreshadowing, I think. The next bit of foreshadowing is more blatant. It's when she's getting dictations about, and the narrator doesn't foreshadow it, just plumps a bit of information on you. Yes, she really liked the dark stuff. Yeah, we know people like that, don't we? And it's not me. And so there we are. That's it. And then we get the, again, traditional folk horror thing of the village and the bad witch and the good witch. There is some kind of juxtaposition there, or gwrth gyferbyniad, as we might say in Welsh, which doesn't mean juxtaposition, it means the opposition between Mrs. Penath, who has the healing touch. She's a light witch, she's a white witch, and we have Sally. I went out with a girl from Cornwall called Travail. There was a second name. They're all called something like that. Trevethick, Travail, etc. This one, Tremaine. Tremaine, meaning the village with the stone, or the farmstead with the stone. Anyway, I don't know why you needed to know that. So, yeah, so there we are. So that's a bit of foreshadowing, but then we lose the other nice bit of foreshadowing is we get this description of Judith's, and I think this is really, really well done by him. We have the description of the landscape, and the camera is focusing in, remember, and we see the Cornish landscape, and we see Saint Gervais, not Saint Gervais, Saint Gervais, and then we see the church and the vicarage, and then we see Judith, and it's a flow of description, and then we have, and it is the isolation of the place, quite explicitly, is the scene of her. She's not going to get married. She's past marriageable age. She's 40 years old. So she's like nearly 20 years older than Stephen, I think. And whether that would be frowned upon, probably would be. So, and then we get the fact that so with the description shows the isolation of the place, shows the isolation of Judith of a piece. They are closely related. So Judith, in a sense, stands for the village of Saint Gervais. She is the avatar of the village. She has dark secrets. She's isolated. She has no inclination to go anywhere else. She just wants to be back in the place. So, Judith is Saint Gervais in a sense. Saint Gervais. I can't stop saying it like that. Okay. And then we have the description of Stephen with the son in his tall, beautiful boy when he was 16, and she wonders idly what he'll have grown into and that's a foreshadowing. We know where this is going to go after that. We've read a lot of stories like this. We know where this is going to go. Now we don't get what's her name, Pascoe. What's she called? The Bonnie Lal thing, and so who is a good singer. Blaise Pascoe? No, I can't remember. Nancy, good old Nance. It's a good old peasant name, isn't it? Oh, you be doing, Nance. And the rival isn't apparent, and then she falls into this petty. So the first thing is she wants to hook the lad, and then she's scorned, and boof, she wants to do him down, and so she does. But and she seeks the empowerment by the spirit of the dark witch. And also Sally Tremaine is really closely associated with the dark wishing well. The wishing well has two sides. So the wishing well represents both the light witch, Mrs. Penath, who heals. People go to the wishing well for healing drafts, but also the curse. And that's really interesting because, curse tablets were a thing, particularly in Roman times. And in Gaul, there are. I only know this. There's probably in other parts of the Roman world, but they would write on pieces of lead. They would put curses and they would throw them in. I only know that because a number of them have been found in Gaulish. The same thing was done in Britannia and at the Roman baths at Aquasulis, which is Bath today. And okay, the people in Bath, the common people in Bath, don't say Bath because that's that trap Bath split is a southeastern dialect feature. So in the southwest they have this long bath. I can't quite do it, but so right in most of English, the vowel in man isn't. I say it like a northerner, like an Italian as well. I have a pure a, whereas in most American English, Australian English, Southern English, man, and when it's actually real drawn, it's cat. And it's almost an E, and I think in New Zealand it becomes an E. But in the southwest they have this AE vowel, but they lengthen it. So they don't make it bath, they make it bath. Yeah, okay. For what that's worth. Anyway, where were we? So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting story. I mean, there's no point really going over. She gets so it's a morality tale as well. She gets a just reward and she falls down into this well. And the well, as I was saying, is dual. I did say something, and I got really interested in the portrayal of witches. And then when I got really into it, it was really, really long. So I'm not sure I've got time to talk about it, but I'm going to just kind of say about how obviously the portrayal of witches in fiction has changed. So we start off with Macbeth. Macbeth's witches, the three witches, important there's three, are supernatural fates, and you can see their linkage. They're portrayed as ugly, wicked old women, but you can see their connection with the Greek fates. I talk about this more in this piece I've posted on Patreon. And also the Norns, the three women who weave your fate. And then we come at Macbeth. Then Goethe has in Faust Part 2, has the mothers. And this is this, numinous, creative and destructive power of the feminine. I think creativity inevitably and understandably is associated with the feminine. Women create life in our species, and so they're that's a massively powerful and has such a pull on all human thinking, and rightly so, but also in some way the mother, the great mother, is associated with death as well, and the devouring. She devours her children as well. So she gives birth and she devours them. We see this in the fates and the norns, and we see this in the ambivalence of the witches. They cast fate. They are morally ambiguous. Benson splits them neatly into good and white hat and black hat witch, but I think as we see in the well itself, it isn't quite as simple. It's commingled, and Judith herself is commingled. She starts off as basically a good girl, and we're rooting for her, aren't we? But she becomes this evil witch at the end, and yet all she wanted was what anybody wants, is to be loved. She's lived this abstracted male life, if you like, in books. She's always been connected to the feminine earth and the villages and the life. Unlike her father, who's very left brain, she has been connected to the earth, and she, like the earth, is ambiguous. rather than ambivalent. She's of two natures. She's both commingled evil and good. She just wants a boyfriend, really. And the younger woman steals the boyfriend from her, in a sense. Although, to be fair to him, he plays it particularly decently. He doesn't lead her on. He's a decent lad. But she is punished for her. She's actually punished not for wanting a boyfriend, but for, I think if she'd, just dressed up and put a bit of makeup on, that would have been acceptable. I don't know if that's how you get boyfriends. Okay, I'm out of my comfort zone here. But I think it is, though. We could have forgiven her for that, but we can't forgive her for meddling with the supernatural. This is it's interesting that most religions advise you not to meddle with the occult, and I think what that's about is taking God's powers in our own hands, whoever your God is. Those powers of fate and what the future will hold, what the future holds. The future is empty and is to be created, and we can have a little part in that by gardening or writing poetry or narrating stories. But to try to usurp God's power, isn't it? It's try to be as I don't need God, I've got magic. And of course science and magic are closely related, as I've said elsewhere, and again that's another rabbit hole. So there's a million things to discuss here, but I think if we just focus on Benson himself, it's a really good story. It does have a lot of symbolism in it, and as I say, I'm not sure the authors ever know exactly what symbolism is in the stories, because they don't really create it. I mean, I think it's a conceit to think, yes, they write it, yes, they use their left brain to shape it and make it kind of digestible, but the content of the story is primarily beyond their control, as with all art, really, and that is divine, if you like. So what by their fruit shall you know them. I know it wasn't quite meant in that context, but it's almost like what we create, we then look at what we create, and we can then try and understand what we've done, but in doing it, we didn't know what we were doing, and I think that's really valid. When I was studying English at school, so I was a cocky young lad. I got thrown out of lots of things. I was put in detention all the time, only through fun. I was just full of fun, as Tom and Charlie are in Ashridge, and they said Ashbridge myself. And I used to think I was so funny, I remember saying about Chaucer, saying, yeah, but he couldn't spell, miss, could he? I know he's a great poet, miss, but he couldn't spell, could he? I thought that was hilarious. She didn't get the joke. She went, it's Middle English, Tony. And then, of course, the other thing was, I would argue with Jackie Lumby, who was my English teacher, who I fell in love with. I'm still embarrassed about it. I'm blushing now. And I remember talking about... actually, my English teacher was called... I had another English teacher called Alistair Brown, who I borrowed and put in Ashridge. He wasn't like that completely. He was a bit like that, but he wasn't completely like that. Anyway, going back to Jackie Lumby, arguing with her about, how could a story ever have a meaning other than the author explicitly intended, and now I'm eating my words, aren't I? I was very cocky, and I thought I knew a lot of things, and I didn't. So anyway, fantastic story. So the craft is really interesting. We talked about that. I think that was useful. The bouncing around, looking at the role of the divine feminine as the witch, and then of course there's lots to say about teen witches and Wicca and folk horror witches, and I write all of that in this essay. And it's an essay, a piece that I've put on. And you may feel it doesn't actually do enough to look to bottom out each one of them. But anyway, there we are. That's my mind. I can't help it. It's just the way it is. It's like saying, well, my eyes are brown. There we are. This is the way it is. People like it if they don't like it. I hope you enjoyed the story. I did. I think he's great. He's probably my fave, as I said.
Speak now, come now, rise now from the forest, from the furrows, from the field of live. Pick out my blood, my skin, my Father of my life, speak now, come now. Rise now from the forest, from the furrows, from the field, and live. Take now my blood, my flesh, my skin, and walk. Father of my life, speak now, come now. Rise now from the forest, from the furrows, from the fields, and live. Take now my blood, my flesh, my skin, and walk. Rise now from the forest, from the furrows, from the fields, and live.